It's 1994. A man walks into a bar. The bartender asks how his day was. He says, "It's fine." He does not mean it's fine. Everyone in the room knows he does not mean it's fine. Nobody asks follow-up questions. He drinks his beer. This is the entire transaction. This is also, somehow, funny. That's Gen X humor in its purest form. The joke is that nothing is particularly okay, and nobody is pretending otherwise, and we're all here anyway. There's no setup, there's no punchline exactly. The humor lives entirely in the gap between what is said and what is meant, and the shared understanding that the gap exists and is enormous, and we've all agreed not to talk about it directly. To a boomer, this isn't a joke. It's a man who needs to talk to someone. To a millennial, it's relatable content that deserves a meme format. To Gen Z, it needs 17 more layers of irony before it qualifies as humor. To Gen X, it's just Tuesday, and also the funniest thing they've heard all week. My name is Eddie Freeman. This channel is about generational differences in how people see the world, including the parts of the world they think are funny. Why are they like that? Subscribe and you'll get a new one every week. To understand Gen X humor, you have to understand what it was reacting against, because it didn't emerge from nowhere. It was a direct and deliberate response to what had come before. Boomer humor, at its dominant peak, was fundamentally optimistic in structure. The comedy of Johnny Carson, Bob Hope, the sitcoms of the 60s and 70s, it operated on the assumption that things could be fixed. The setup created a problem. The punchline resolved it. Order was disrupted and then restored. The audience laughed because the world snapped back to something recognizable. Even when the material was dark, death, illness, failure, the comedic structure implied a stable world that could absorb the hit and continue. That optimism was earned. Boomers grew up in post-war prosperity. The American century was in full swing. The deal was that if you worked hard and played by the rules, the world would reward you. That deal was imperfect and exclusionary in ways history has documented extensively, but for the people it worked for, it produced a genuine sense that things were basically okay. And basically okay produced basically okay humor. Gen X grew up watching the deal break down. The divorce rate peaked at the exact moment Gen X was in childhood. The economic disruptions of the 1970s, stagflation, oil shocks, industrial decline, arrived during their formative years. The idealism of the 1960s counterculture, which boomers had built their generational identity around, was visibly curdling by the time Gen X was old enough to observe it. The politicians who promised things delivered something else. The institutions that were supposed to function frequently didn't. Gen X processed all of this and arrived at a specific conclusion. Sincerity is dangerous. If you believe in something genuinely and publicly, you can be genuinely and publicly disappointed. The performance of belief, of hope, of investment in outcomes, all of it leaves you exposed in a way that a posture of detachment does not. Irony was the armor. If you're already treating something as a joke, it can't hurt you when it fails. This is not a small psychological move. It is a comprehensive reorganization of how you relate to the world. And it produced a humor style that is unlike anything that came before it and has been underappreciated by everyone who came after. The television that Gen X produced in the 1990s is the clearest record of what their humor actually looked like and how it worked. Seinfeld was explicitly a show about nothing. The characters cared deeply about small, trivial things. Parking spaces, soup, jacket etiquette, and treated those trivialities with the same moral seriousness that previous generations had reserved for things that actually mattered. The joke was the inversion. In a world where the big things had revealed themselves as unreliable, the small things were all that was left. And caring about them intensely was both absurd and, for a generation that had concluded the big things weren't worth caring about, completely rational. The Simpsons, in its peak years, which coincide almost perfectly with Gen X's peak cultural output, operated on a similar register. The dad is a lovable idiot. The institutions are incompetent. The system is broken. Nobody is really in charge. And all of this is funny rather than tragic, because the characters exist in a world that has made its peace with dysfunction. The joke is not that things will get better. The joke is that this is just how it is, and we're all aware of it, and somehow, we're still here, eating donuts. Beavis and Butthead, The Daily Show in its early years, Office Space, Reality Bites, Clerks, the entire alternative comedy scene of the 1990s, from Mr. Show to early Conan O'Brien to the comedy that was coming out of Second City and Upright Citizens Brigade, was doing the same thing from different angles. The world is absurd. The institutions are hollow. Caring too much is embarrassing. Caring too little is the only philosophically defensible position. And this, somehow, is hilarious. The specific mechanism of Gen X humor is worth unpacking, because it's more sophisticated than it appears. Straight-faced delivery of something obviously false or absurd. The humor lives entirely in the deadpan, the refusal to signal that what you're saying is a joke. If you laugh at your own material, you've broken the contract. The contract is, we are both intelligent adults who understand that this is ridiculous, and neither of us is going to acknowledge that directly. This requires a shared assumption of intelligence on both sides. The joke only works if the other person understands what's happening. If they take the deadpan statement at face value, the joke collapses into a misunderstanding. Gen X humor is fundamentally collaborative. It demands that your audience is in on it. This is also why it doesn't always travel between generations. Boomers who take the ironic statement at face value miss the joke entirely and get confused or offended. Gen Z, who have grown up with so many layers of irony that even sincere statements are read as potentially ironic, sometimes can't find the floor of a Gen X joke because they're looking for layers that aren't there. Gen X irony is first-generation irony. It means exactly what it appears to mean, which is the opposite of what is being said. No additional levels, no meta-commentary on the irony itself. The underappreciation of Gen X humor in the current cultural conversation is its own small irony. Millennials get credited with bringing irony and self-deprecation into internet culture. And they did. But they inherited both from Gen X and then added their own layer of emotional confessionalism on top. The millennial meme that says something like, "I'm not okay, but I'm pretending to be, and that's relatable," is a Gen X joke with the mask slightly removed. Gen X would never take the mask off. The mask is the joke. Gen Z gets credited with absurdism, with meta-irony, with humor that deconstructs its own mechanics. And they did develop those genuinely. But the lineage runs through Gen X's willingness to treat the joke as the subject rather than the vehicle. Almost nobody credits Gen X with any of this. Partly because Gen X doesn't loudly credit itself with anything, and partly because the cultural conversation about humor, like the cultural conversation about everything, mostly skips Gen X in its hurry to talk about the generations on either side. There's a particular kind of Gen X humor that exists in almost pure form and is worth describing because it captures the whole thing. Someone asks how you are. You say, "Living the dream." Both parties understand that no dreams are being lived. This is not a complaint. It is not an invitation to discuss how the dreams are not being lived. It is simply an acknowledgement, in the most efficient format possible, that reality and aspiration do not coincide, and that this is funny rather than tragic, and that we can now proceed to the next topic. Someone observes that something has gone wrong. You say, "Cool, great, this is fine." Everyone in the vicinity understands that it is not fine. Nobody elaborates. The humor is entirely in the shared recognition of the gap and the shared decision to not make a production of it. A meeting ends with nothing resolved. You look at the person next to you with a specific expression. No words are necessary. The expression contains the entire joke. The joke is, we both know what just happened. We are both going to continue showing up anyway, and the fact that we continue showing up is the most Gen X thing imaginable. That last part, the showing up despite everything, is the thing that the cynicism in Gen X humor is most often mistaken for nihilism. It isn't. Nihilism stops caring. Gen X still cares. They just refuse to perform caring in a way that exposes them to mockery or disappointment. The cynicism is a style, not a worldview. Underneath the deadpan, there are actual feelings being protected by the delivery, which is, when you think about it, very funny in its own way.
Prove me wrong in the comments.
What's the funniest Gen X thing you know? A show, a line, a moment, a specific meme that you think the other generations completely missed?